The mixing stage of your productions is one of those crucial moments where you have to really get into the zone and get things right. Because after the mixing stage, there's not really much that you can do to kind of correct mistakes in individual elements, because the whole point of the mixing stage is to get your down mix, to get your individual file that then goes to mastering. So starting off your mixing session in the right way is very, very important, and today I'm going to show you how to do that. Now there's many different things that go into this that is very, very important, but that I'm not necessarily going to talk about today. So for example, your mindset, being in good health, having good energy, maybe doing it in the morning when your ears are nice and fresh, having a good listening environment, but also having good reference material to listen to and to tune your ears for the genre that you're actually trying to mix. And of course, there's many other things that you can do to make sure that you're in that creative mindset that you need to be in order to get the mix to work. One of the things that I really like doing is lighting a little bit of incense like this, and just leaving that somewhere behind here, so that your room is smelling nice and you get a creative boost from that. But of course, there's also other things that you can do. The main focus for today though is actually preparing the project so that you can get right into the mix in the right way. So here I have a project. This is the actual production, as you can see. And what I personally like to do is I actually like to render things out into audio. And then what I do is I hop over into Reaper and I actually mix my stuff there. And exporting this kind of stuff is as easy as just opening up all of the individual tracks that you want to export, selecting them, and then I'm going to select the timeline so that we have the exact length selected that we want for our stems. Make sure that nothing is soloed before you do this. And then just go right click here, Ctrl+Shift+R for exporting, and then select the tracks only. Make sure that the option include return and master effects is included. Otherwise it won't include any effects that are on groups. So for example, my kick is here. It wouldn't include any of the effects that are in here, nor will it include the volume balance. But speaking about volume balance, I personally like to normalize all of the tracks so that I have to redo the volume balance in the actual mixing session. And then you just hit export. I go to my mixing stems and then I go and export wherever I need to export this. One of the tips that I would give you is to name this something useful like drums dash, so that you get drums dash the name of every track. It will always take the name of the track and use that for every file that it creates. And of course, because I've already exported this at the end, you're going to end up with something that looks like this, which is just a whole folder with all of the sounds, each on individual tracks. Now, this takes a while. This takes a couple of hours to render at least. And in fact, for my projects, I would say it takes usually like 8 hours of rendering. And of course, that is divided up into multiple different stages. So I cannot just let it run and just have it do its thing, because I want to have one render for all of the atmospheres and pads, one render for the basses, one render for the drums, one for the effects, one for the one-shots. Usually what ends up happening is that I take the group which is the biggest and let that render overnight. And then in the morning, I can delete that group, remove that CPU load from the actual rendering of the tracks, and then render out everything else during the day, because you can just leave it in the background. So now going into Reaper, the very first thing that I'm going to do is loading up my mixing preset, or my mixing template, I should say. And as you can see, I have the same sort of groups that I have in my production. So now all that I have to do is I have to take all of the individual stems and just import them. Going to import all of these. I do have some extra stems in here, which are an alternative version of the kick and bass, which I want to keep and might use in this mix as well, depending on how well one or the other goes with this mix. But either way, I'm just going to import it by dragging it in here, and then same time position on separate tracks, because of course we want to treat these as stems. And now the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll all the way down, mute all of the tracks, then I'm going to select all of the individual files here by scrolling up again, and then right click item properties, and I'm going to take 8 dB away from them. I want to have a little bit of extra room in here, because of course we normalized each individual file, and therefore if we were to play it just as it is, I'm going to be massively clipping my master. Now the cool thing is, because we have given it names with the groups in them, what I can do is I can just select all of the atmospheres and pads and just move that into my pads group. All of my basses here, and move that into my basses group. Can take all of my drums. Into the drums group it goes. Going with the effects here. One shots, you just take all of the one shots. In here. Take all of our sequences here. move them into the sequences. And then finally the vocals are going to go into the vocals group. Now, if at this point you're saying, wow, this guy knows a lot about mixing, I would like for him to mix my stuff, I actually do that. And you can just go onto my website and you'll find all of the details there. So if you're interested in that, go make sure that you check that out. And now let's get back into what I was actually talking about here. Actually, before I go, I forgot also like, subscribe and comment and all of that good stuff. Bye. Now, one thing that you notice is that the colors automatically change. So you can see that for every group, the color automatically changes. That is actually a script that I use for that. It isn't a standard feature of Reaper. And one of the things that you're going to find is if you do this multiple times, if you actually export and then import it in a different DAW, once you get used to that DAW and once you work with it more and more and more, you're going to find these things like the keyboard shortcuts, all of the different scripts, all of the different tools that you can use to make your life easier. And specifically for mixing, I really like Reaper because it's specifically designed for that. I mean, it can also do production. It is a general purpose DAW, but it definitely has more mixing features than your general DAW. And that is in fact one of the reasons why I like to export my stems into audio and then import them in Reaper for my actual mixing. Now, at the end of the day, this is my process and you don't have to do it this way. If you don't want to do it this way, that is perfectly fine. What really matters is your own workflow, your own personal way of working with the material that you have and trying to get the balances correct and trying to get every element to sit in the mix in the exact way that it needs to sit in there. And the way that you're going to achieve that is going to be different for every single person. Like, of course, you're going to have a way of working that doesn't work for me, and I have a way of working that might not work for you. At the end of the day, what is important is that you have a system that allows you to get into that flow of actually mixing your stuff and no longer worrying about things like the production. Because one of the things that I see very often happening with many other producers is that during their mixing stage, they end up going back into the production and they end up changing patches, they end up modifying different effects. They maybe start to rethink the arrangement and all of that stuff. And at some point, you just have to commit to the ideas that you have created. Because at the end of the day, let's be serious here, we're trying to make music and we're trying to make a finished track, a finished product, right? It doesn't really matter how cool that synth sound is that you created or how cool that melody is that you created or that kick and bass pattern or whatever it is that you find cool about your track if you never finish it and never release it. I mean, it's cool for you, but one of the cool things about music production is that at the end of it, you get to share something that you made with the world. At least to me personally, that is the whole joy of creation. The same way that for me with the videos, the joy of creating the videos isn't so that I have created the video, is that you guys get to see something that I made. Now, of course, I can go deeper into this area over here and talk a little bit more about what I would do next. Usually it is unmuting my kick and then my bass and trying to mix those in, and then starting off with some of the main sequences, some of the other main effects, maybe the main drums over here, maybe the extra percussions and whatnot. But really, again, here, your mixing process is probably going to vary from my mixing process. Even if you export with audio, you might not actually normalize all of your different audio tracks, and therefore you don't have to mute everything and then re-establish the balance and then get into the actual mixing of the track. Like I literally have to sit here now and unmute the most important thing here and then go, okay, what is the volume that this is going to need to be? I'm going to unmute the next thing here. What is the volume that this bass is going to need to be? Or whatever the main bass is here. It's actually this last one here. Now I have to balance this bass against the kick that I already have. Then I have to unmute all of my drums and balance those all against each other. Maybe do some preliminary EQing and that kind of stuff. And only then, once I've added all of my elements, can I go into the actual mixing stage and trying to fix all of the extra things that I need to fix in order to make sure that the track is nicely balanced. Maybe you already come in with all of the volume balances from the production intact, and maybe that is a better way of working for you, because that is just a faster workflow. But for me personally, I like that I have to forcefully re-establish the volume balances of the track, because it allows me to rethink what the function of every element is going to be, as well as making sure that I have to focus on each element individually and kind of hear, okay, what is this element doing? What is it trying to do? Maybe, as I said, some preliminary EQing to remove some very glaring issues like low frequency rumbling and that kind of stuff. Now, the final thing that I want to talk about with all of this mixing stuff is that I should probably say that it's not about what people think it is about, like parallel compression, like very specific EQ charts that you might use, very specific tricks that a certain YouTuber taught you. What is going to make a good mix is your experience with listening to what audio needs to do and then putting in the balance that makes sure that whatever elements that you're balancing actually does what it needs to do. Like realistically, do you think that setting a ratio on a compressor on one specific element or even on one specific bus is going to make or break your mix? No. What is probably going to make and break your mix is going to be excessive low end in elements that don't need it, a volume balance that is all out of whack, a stereo width that is too wide or too narrow, or even at the production stage, just 5 different musical ideas all popped on top of each other and not really making sense with each other. I mean, I still have a production mix for a reason. Like I still set volumes here for a reason. I still do EQing in here for a reason, right? If I go to some of these groups maybe and some of these elements, you can see EQing here. I can go into my kick and there's probably going to be an EQ on here somewhere. In fact, there's multiple. And there's like different racks that do transitions and whatnot. But also there's just a Shadow Zeros mastering compressor on here to do some preliminary compression on this kick drum, because I just wanted to try what this kick drum is going to sound like in the context of my production mix with this particular compressor on there. Like this compressor here isn't part of the actual mix, but it's already doing like a mixing function, right? We are compressing the kick and it's going to be a detail thing because I'm probably not going to be compressing this kick drum much. You can see 1.5 dB of gain reduction here and 1 dB of gain reduction here. That is not a lot of compression. But the point is I get to try a couple of different things here. I already have kind of a basic idea of what the balance of this track could be. And I'm adding elements in such a way that they're not going to disrupt that balance too much. Like I can play this thing here. You can hear that this area is now pretty full of musical ideas. If I add another 2-3 melodies on top of this, it is going to be an absolute mess. So even in this stage, parts of the production, the way that the production works, is still very, very important. And you have to realize that in this stage, once you are in the actual mixing stage, what you're essentially doing is you're just trying to enhance the production that is already there. You're just trying to enhance the ideas that is already there. That also means that I'm not adding any crazy glitch effects or like extra layers to a lead or that kind of stuff. I'm just trying to get all of the things that I already have and put them in balance with each other. So that's how you get your mixing sessions off to the right start. And to be honest, towards the end there, it's also about how you finish your mixing sessions in the right way, right? Just kind of explaining how a mixing session is supposed to work. Now, again, a lot of this is personal preference because I like the way of working like this. One of the other things that is a consideration here is that I also do mixes for clients. So I'm not always working with my own material. And for mixes with clients, I actually ask them to not normalize their exports. Because in that case, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to look into the listener's mind and kind of see, okay, what was their idea of this production? And how can I make sure that with the least amount of changes, I can still make their production work? Again, in the mixing stage, it is not really up to me to really redefine what the track is all about. I'm just trying to put everything in the right space that it needs to be in. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you did by leaving a like and make sure that you're subscribed. Another way to support the channel is to do so financially, which you can do over on my Patreon page or by checking out my products on Gumroad, Payhip or Andrea Chrome's website. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.